This is my 40th year of teaching ceramics, my 50th year of doing clay, 18 years teaching in Japan, foreigners, ceramics. I had a studio in Japan until the tsunami came, but we're slowly rebuilding in Moscow. And I was there for 5 weeks helping some recovery. Just got back a little while ago. As you can see by the array of teapots on the table, there is no real right or wrong teapot. Now, I know the poster said the ultimate teapot. I hate to tell you this, but I haven't made it yet. So what we're going to do is, I wanted you to bring your teapots in so I could kind of see what the common denominator is on the teapots to make them a little more efficient, pour a little nicer, and kind of move you into some different shapes today. So I'll be doing a mix of European teapots and Japanese teapots as I've learned them. Now there's no right way or wrong way of doing this. So if you have a way of doing it, that's fine. And I'll just kind of put my hand in here and there and embellish it a little bit, hopefully to your liking, okay? So I'm going to talk just a few minutes about the teapot. And the most common denominator I see on the table is the spout. Most of the spouts are too low, and some of them are too long. Okay, you're going to fill this thing with water, probably up in that range on this teapot. If your spout is not high enough, it's going to, maybe if your spout's down here somewhere, you're only going to be able to fill it up to here, right? You're not going to be able to get as much liquid in it as you'd like to. The other thing is too is that the dynamics of the hydraulics of the liquid are real critical. So depending on how the spout is curved and where it is up here, when you tip it, as the liquid, you know, right here, as you pour forward, it's going to start looking like this, right? In other words, it's going to start creeping up here. It's going to put pressure in this direction, and depending on the amount of pressure, the size of the holes is going to determine how well it pours out the top. Okay? Now you all know what it is that you have in your refrigerator that pours perfectly. What is it?
Orange juice.
Milk carton. Right?
Yeah.
And why? Because it has this very sharp angle, right? And it's very pointed there. So if you look at my teapots, you'll see that I just put a little bit of curve right there, and it's very sharp. Now, my grandmother used to put a little bit of lard right there. Lard or butter. And so it repelled the liquid, right? So very seldom did it drip. Now, I used to be very, very concerned about teapots that drip until about 20 years ago. I had the good fortune of visiting Hamada's studio. It's been longer than that. It was in the 80s. And we had tea from one of his teapots, and it dribbled all over the table. Also, I was fortunate enough to have tea from a couple of Kwaikanjiro's teapots, and they did the same thing. So I'm not that excited about trying to make them that good. You're always going to get a little drip, and you know, if you put a little tea cozy around it before you pour, that'll take care of it. It'll just run back down here. So, and also the other thing that somebody and I were talking about here was how the spout twists, right? So one way to get around it is not to cut this way, right? The other thing is to, after you throw a lot of spouts, you'll find that you'll be throwing those spouts with less twist. In other words, if you can throw a cup now in 3 pulls, you know, 12-ounce cup, do the same thing on the spout. Throw that spout. It's a bud vase, right? The spout is really, and we're going to get into that real quick here. So here's your, right? And it's going to curve like this. It's going to be bulbous like this, right? And so you're going to cut it to add it to whatever you're making. So you should have by now in your life as potters have made hundreds of bud vases. They're great gifts. You go to somebody's house, put a nice flower in it and give it away. So the teapot is a culmination of everything you've learned. Okay? So what have you learned? Well, you all know how to make cups and bowls. Okay, that's just 2 bowls put together. right? So if you can't make it this way in one piece, make two bowls, put it together, cut the bottom out and use that for the lid. I mean, it's really that simple. In a bud vase, you all can make a bud vase. That's not so hard. Okay, this is a very classic shape. Today what I'm going to do is get you to start throwing in a straight line. Say this is your foot. You've pushed the clay into this point. You're going to pull the clay out here, and then you're going to bring it in this way. Okay? If you learn to do this on a small scale, I can show you how to make pots bigger than that large pot there very easily at the last week of June. Okay? Because then what you're going to do, you're going to reach in there and you're going to push this out, pressure here, a little bit until it gets out, and then you're going to lift this from the inside. So all of a sudden, you have a very bulbous shape that's thinned out, it's not going to be too heavy, and it's going to make more sense to you once we start doing this. Any questions about anything so far? Well, you guys are easy.
So far.
So this morning we're going to make all the pieces. This afternoon I've got some pieces already trimmed that I'll go through assembly with you. So as you make the pieces, and don't agonize over it. If something goes wrong, get rid of that piece of clay. The Western philosophy is to try to fix things. Okay, in here, don't fix anything today. If the clay goes bad, it sinks, it sags, it twists, cut it off. Get rid of it and get the next ball of clay. The amount of time you spend trying to make that thing get fixed is time you could be putting back in the learning process and not be reinforcing bad habits, okay? So, as we go through the day, have questions, ask, and something that I always tell people is in the morning, I start quite early, I try to throw something small, usually a mug or a cup, and see how things go. And if it goes really well, then I know I'm going to have a good day, everything's going to work out. Now the technique I use isn't necessarily something you have to do. I'm just going to show you how I do it. You can try some of these techniques and see how it works for you. So keep in mind that I've spent 37 trips to Japan studying in different parts of the country. So a lot of what I do is kind of seeped in from there. So part of the Zen philosophy is things are connected. We're all connected. We're all connected to the universe, to the plants, the flowers, the rocks, what have you. So teapots that we throw in Japan all come from one piece of clay. This is a family here. And from this family, we're going to create a spout, a lid, and the body. So usually the spout comes first, and you all have calipers. If you don't, hopefully we can share enough. Now those plastic ones are real nice. Just keep them clean on the tip so you get good measurements. These I made from a road sign that I saw one day laid on the road years ago. And so it's very thin and sharp, so it gives me good measurement. So 3 inches to 3.5 inches is a nice size for a teapot lid. Those of you that like to keep your hands inside, you know, working that clay, you might want to go a 4-inch lid opening. That way you'll always be able to get your hand in there. But at some point you're going to want to make real small teapots. So little things like this that you can get in there with. It's just a piece of bamboo that's rounded, a couple of sticks. New Zealand potter gave me that about 2-3 months ago, and he wouldn't tell me what he used it for, but I found some uses for it. And you'll see some tools here. You're welcome to pick them up and try them that maybe you're not familiar with, but you're welcome to. So if the bud vase goes good, then I'm going to have a good day on the wheel today, and you're all here to see it. And those of you, don't be afraid to use a lot of water. Boy, that wasn't supposed to happen. Can you cancel that out on the video?
Nothing happened.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how you did that.
So you'll see some potters raise the clay up quite high and push it back down a couple times. And for a lot of different reasons. I do it so I can really feel this clay. Joan pre-wedged it for me, so I had pre-wedged clay today. And then I re-wedged it. Some of you are throwing off the hump. How many of you throw off the hump? Mm-hmm. That's another workshop, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm doing is just grabbing a specific amount of clay here, just because that's what I've done for a long time. Either 2 fingers worth, 3 fingers, 4 fingers, whatever I think I might need. And from that, I'm going to go into the spout.
So you're doing the spout first, not
Yeah, we're going to make the spout first. And you notice my foot's not on the pedal. I work at about 2 speeds. 2 o'clock very slow in the afternoon. You see I have a little piece of tape on that first finger. I was cutting a spout and really cut my finger in the process. And I'll try not to do that today. I'm sorry?
612. What kind you're using?
I don't know, whatever you guys had there. What?
Looks like 612. 612. So did you push it out, or is that just how wide you opened it to?
I pushed it out. And you notice when I cut the top, I cut it at about a 45-degree angle. The reason for that is that it gives me a real, you'll see it in a moment here, those of you standing up close here. It gives me a real sharp edge that I can work with.
Do you have a camera? You want to tweet something? George, do you don't mind? Right?
That's right.
It's not too thick, right?
No. Because we're going to do some cutting on it, and you'll see that this afternoon.
You're going to trim it, you mean?
Yeah, well, we're going to, yeah, I guess you could call it that, but we're going to cut a piece off of it.
Oh, you want to put
And,
that over here?
no, that's okay. No, it'll pick up some of that. So don't be afraid to take a lot of clay, and you'll see different lids this afternoon when I'm putting pots together. So this is a cap lid. It's something you're probably all familiar with, and that's why I decided to start with that. So that's about where you want to be. You want half of it inside your calipers and about half on the outside. Okay. And a nice little curve down here.
George, say that again about the measurement that you said half in and half out.
Yeah, if you look at the calipers on this donut that's here, I've got about half of it inside the caliper and about half outside the caliper. Okay, and that's about where you want to be. I'm going to slow the wheel down a little bit now. And I'm going to put these 2 fingers. This one's a little longer, so it's going to fit under there, a little shorter up there. I'm going to squeeze together this way, and I'm going to push in a little bit. Take a check here, see how close I am. Whew, not too bad, huh?
So do you have a size that you've chosen, or you just?
Yes, I measured a 3-inch.
That's 3 inches.
Maybe it was 3.5. So you want to set it's 3.5. So 3.5 to 4-inch is a nice range to work in the beginning. Okay, that's going to work, huh? Okay. Now, I didn't do that to impress you. It's just that to really learn, as you've probably all realized, to really learn how to do something well, you have to do a lot of it. So if whatever you're struggling with, if it's cups, you just need to sit down and make 500, 1,000 cups until you can sit down and do it and daydream. You know. Yeah, you know, like what happens, how many musicians do we have? How long have you been playing?
Long time.
What do you play?
Well, I sing mostly, but I started out on the piano and played that for a number of years.
So it's probably very fluid now, and you probably hit all the notes pretty well.
Well,
Without,
it's better than others.
yeah, right. It's the way with pottery. But it's kind of that, it becomes innate. You kind of sense it before you do it. It's kind of like, I have a jazz musician that told me, he's a good friend, he says, I can hear the note before I play it. That's how long he's been playing. You know, it's kind of like watching a dancer. It's a very fluid thing. It works well, it feels good. I can sit, look out the window and watch the butterflies go by and the hummingbirds. And at the end of the day, I've got about 100 cups laying there. Okay. So I'm just going to smooth that off. I'm going to take and make a double cut here. Now, does anybody know why I would have that pad of clay there?
Well, you have what?
Why I would leave that pad of clay?
Do a knob?
Huh?
For a knob?
No. It's going to be a cap lid, right? It's going to be smooth. If I throw these in the morning on a day like this is going to firm up quite quickly. I'm going to trim here. So I leave that pad on there to keep that top from drying out on me. Because I'm going to turn it over, peel that cap off, and that will be just right for trimming. But this will be firm enough where I can put clay against it. And I'm not going to bend things up. Okay? Okay, so now we have the spout and we have the lid. Now this may seem a little daunting to you, so if you're not comfortable about throwing off the hump, just use 3 pieces. You know, a piece for the lid, piece for the spout, piece for the body, and we'll get those all put together this afternoon. And you've all seen the book 500 Teapots? Yeah, amazing. If you go online and check some of the Japanese potters that specialize in making teapots, it's endless, it's endless. I was at a festival during Golden Week back in April, and there was 350 potters lined up, one right next to the other, 10 by 10, and there was probably 400 variations of mugs and bowls. It was amazing. Okay, so I'm going to...
the bottom a little thick?
Yeah, I leave the bottom real thick because I'm going to get in there. I like the inside look fairly smooth and round. So what happens, you get that little mogul in there, right? That little bump that wants to stay down in there, same on your bowls. So I'm going to reach in there with this bamboo tool here and smooth that out so that when you look in there, it has a nice line to it. Because, again, part of the philosophy I kind of grew up with over there was continuity of things, you know. So don't make them too smooth. Don't make them, you know, leave a little something in there. But also, you want to, okay, see what I'm doing? Okay, I'm just pushing that in. Where do you leave most of your clay when you're throwing? On the bottom. So I'm going to set that foot fairly close to where I want it finished. I don't like trimming because it creates a lot of recycling, right? So I try to throw as much clay into the pot as possible, and if need be, I'll take a little trim on the outside before I cut it loose. Okay. So again, remember on the drawing board there I said we're going to bring the clay out and then up. So usually it's about 1/3 up this way and 2/3 this way and 1/3 this way, right? Because I want the shoulder up high on the pot. And it's the same thing that goes for large vessels too. I'm going to start about 3 o'clock, but what I'm doing is that this thumb and this finger, these 2 thumbs are together so that as I'm pushing in, this thumb is helping, is moving. So this thumb and this finger are pushing clay in, okay? And the same thing happens when I put clay up. The sponge is not on the clay. It's behind my thumb and first finger so I can squeeze water where I need it. and taking water from out of here as opposed to your bucket, because this water will have more clay in it. It'll work better for you. So I'm going to start at about 3 o'clock, and as I pull around, I'm going to give a twist. If you look real hard and closely, you can see that that twist, as you're coming up, moves inward. That's what keeps the clay from coming out. If you just pull from here, the clay is going to come out too fast and too far. So I'm going to start here, get some lubrication on it, and I'm going to start pulling up. Now there's a lot of clay there, so I can't come very fast. And I'm looking at the circles inside. There's no reason to look on the outside of your pot. Inside is what counts. So I can see the rings in there, so I know how close my fingers are or how far apart they are. Okay? So I'll make another squeeze down here.
Can you repeat the dimensions? You said, was it 2/3, 1/3? Or?
Yeah, it's usually 2/3, 1/3. It doesn't have to be, but it'll get the shoulder of the vessel a little higher if you do. Now I normally don't use heat, but at some point I may ask Joan to come up here and put her hairdryer on things just to kind of expedite. This time of year at the shop I do a lot of bulbous forms because I can open up my shop and it's probably about 85 degrees there now. And so things dry very quickly. And so in the afternoon I can go ahead and trim everything. Okay. So see how I'm working this in? Okay. Now the clay that you guys are using is a little softer than I would normally use for this kind of shape. So I'm going to kind of use a rib here to stiffen things up a bit and kind of I also throw in front of a mirror so I don't have to do this. Okay. How many of you having back problems now?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Have any dancers in here? No. If you watch a dancer sit, they usually sit with a very straight back because they're bending here. In Japan, we sit at a wheel cross-legged at the same level as the wheel head. And so it forces you, when you lean forward, to sit with a straight back. So some of you may want to try that. But also, I found that if I'm really conscious when I'm sitting at a wheel like this, that I keep my back straight and try not to lean over on things.
The wheel seems very low relative to
Right.
your height.
Speed kills. Right. So you want to go slow. My wheel seat is
No, you're so tall, and the wheel seems so low. And the chairs, you just seem very high relative to the height of the wheel.
Normally you want the wheel about level with your chair, even if you're a little tall. If you're a little taller, you'll just scoot back a little more. But the key is to sit with your back straight. You don't want to be so high that you're like this to catch your work. That's why when we throw off the hump constantly, the clay is right here so that your elbows are 90 degrees to your body. And so you're like this, so you're leaning forward, you're throwing the piece, taking it off, and bring the clay up to the same height each time. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics in throwing off the hump. But once you get it, it's very relaxing. You can sit hours and throw off the hump. You know, small things, you know, sake cups and you know me, things like that. Okay, I'm just moving this top in now. So it's starting to take its shape, right? So I don't want this too bulbous yet because it's going to lose some strength. I'll have to repack the clay with that rib again, and then I can start pushing that out. But I don't want to push that out until I get this pretty close to finish up here. So my fingers on the inside of that rib, I'm compressing the clay, kind of tighten it up. This feels really nice clay. I usually throw with Bravo Buff, especially larger things, but this is a nice clay. Any other questions as I'm going here? Be sure to ask.
How thick is the body right now?
Right now, it's not quite as thick as this rim. I'm keeping a lot of clay up here because,
Close it.
right, so you can close it so it doesn't ripple on you. Remember, we can always cut clay off, right? It's really a problem trying to put a piece of clay back on. So at that point, you just cut it off and start again, or cut it in half and see, you know, where you're at with it. You know, Joan, there should be a copper rod somewhere over there with a sponge on it. I think it's still over on the table. If you can find that, that'd be great. Oh, here it is. I hit it on myself. Most sensitive finger on your hand is usually the little one, so it gives me a better gauge as to how much pressure I'm putting up here. And I'm going to close this in a little more than the finished piece because we can always do what?
Open it.
Always open it up, right. So watch out for the water lane on the bottom because sometimes that can cause a crack later on. Okay, so now I'm going to push that bottom out a little bit. But before I do, to kind of minimize that little mogul that we get in there sometimes, I'm going to cut a wedge of clay out of here.
Are you talking about right above the base, or?
I'm sorry?
Are you talking about, when you're talking about the mogul,
Yeah, it's usually on the inside.
the little bump at the very bottom when you start coming?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, or like when you're shaping a bowl, on the inside you'll hit that bump. If you cut a wedge, if you keep this wall straight, and before you actually start shaping it, cut the edge of clay out of here, that mogul will push in and it'll fill in down here in this slot that we just cut out. It's kind of neat. One thing, I try to take workshops every year from different potters so that I can kind of see these little different things that they do to create whatever they're going to create. It's really fun.
My instructor called it the beginner bump.
Yeah, right,
The way
right.
you let to wear off. You know?
So I'm just pushing out gently here against my fingers and moving down. Again, like I say, I normally would be looking into a mirror, sitting straight up. So those of you that want to save your backs, get yourself a mirror to so you can sit up straight. Also, mirror is wonderful for making different shapes. You can take a grease pencil and mark the outline points of whatever you're throwing and throw to those points. And you'll find out it'll speed things up, especially if you're doing multiples.
Are you just cleaning up the bottom?
Yeah, just clean up the bottom.
How big of a mirror do you use?
It's not very big. It's only maybe 6 by 8, and it's sitting against the wall. Yeah, so I can see the whole pot. And if it's a larger pot, if I just lean back a little, which is good for the back, right? Yeah, yeah.
I'm fine to get so dirty. But I can't see anything because there's too much splashing on it.
Okay, so we had the outside, right? Now the inside, so this kind of gives me an idea. That's about where I should be. So you want to be on the inside when this all takes place so that you can have some latitude here. Later on this morning, we'll do a drop lid so you can see how that works as opposed to a cap lid. So you notice how thick that was above there. Okay, really important, otherwise you're going to fight moving that clay in each time. So, and you want it canted at an angle on the inside so that if you glaze up close here, and this is going the opposite direction, right? So when you put it in there, it's not going to stick. Also, it makes it a little stronger, less chance of this hole warping on you. Even though you fire it with the lid on, sometimes it will still warp. Okay. Remember, we can always open it up, right?
this called a drop lid?
No, that's a cap lid.
Cap lid.
Yeah, that'll be on the quiz. Okay, so take your time opening it up so that you don't have a problem where you have to push it back in. And use a good chamois. You know, if the chamois starts giving you trouble, get rid of it and get another one. I see guys using chamois that should have been thrown away years ago. Now, as you're pulling it out, it wants to spring back in, so, okay, that'll work. Okay, let me ask you, how many of you cut your pots off this way? How many times have you cut up into it?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I was taking a workshop from a Canadian potter by the name of Jim Etzkorn about 10, 12 years ago, and he cuts his off this way.
Yeah. Somebody
In
else.
all the years I was potting, it never occurred to me to cut it off that way, and that's the way I teach my students. So they never cut the bottom out of their pot. I'll show you very quickly a spout that you all can make, and you can make a few of these, okay? So it's just a little bowl is what it is.
That's not the spout.
Yeah, this is going to be the spout. Yeah, I know you all know how to make bowls, right? So this is a... I normally don't show this early in the game because everybody will do this and they don't want to make the it more traditional. But this will work. But you're not going to see how it works until later today. So it's not going to make any sense to you at this point, okay? Just so you know.
Whoa.
Huh?
Two spouts.
Two spouts, 2 for 1. Okay, and I'll show you how this works this afternoon. Okay, we'll put that on a pot. Okay. And of course, depending on how big you want it, is determined by how big you make the little bowl, right? Have any of you done this before? Oh boy, this is great. See?
And you put it on teapots?
Yeah, we can put it on a teapot, although it works better on a different form, more of a vertical form than it does on a bulbous form, but you can try both. Okay, on this spout, just grab the amount of clay you think you're going to need for those of you on the wheel there throwing off the hump. The rest of you, just a chunk of clay. It's about 3/4 of a pound to 1/2 pound. Just drop your thumb in there, move it to the right, squeeze the clay, bring it up. Get a little lubrication on there.
So this a different one, or are you doing the same one again?
I'm doing these.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so get the clay coming in right away while it's still thick. Reach down there, get that bulb going, and then come inward and upward. Get your elevation. Remember, you don't need a lot of lubrication. In fact, the slower you throw, I throw with guys in Japan that don't use water at all. It's called dry throwing.
Shin doesn't use water.
And it's a matter of slowing the wheel down and really being aware of how much pressure you're putting on the clay and the kind of clay you're using. Some clays lend themselves to that much more than others. And make them different sizes, make a couple extra ones. You know, some of them maybe want a little bigger, some a little smaller. Especially if you're doing a lot of different sizes.
Do you make more than one spout for a teapot, or?
Yeah, I was just saying at the end of the day, the last thing I'll do is throw another half a dozen or a dozen spouts beyond what I have. And usually another 5 or 6 lids too. Or if I'm using 2 different size lids, about 5 or 6 of each. So if I drop one, or I ding one, or I trim through one, or, you know, just a little insurance. Also, the other thing about having a mirror in front of you, I think it makes you a little more honest about what you're doing. It's almost like somebody watching you. you know, outside of you, so that you'll be less likely to let things just kind of pass. That you'll see, okay, that's not quite right. I can see it, so I'm not going to stay with this. I'm going to go another piece of clay. Or, you know, this, as I'm assembling things, it doesn't look right. I'm not going to do it. You know, it's just not going to work. Instead of trying to, you know, make it happen. So it's kind of like a dancer in front of a mirror, right? Any dancers here? In front of that mirror, it keeps you honest. So bud vase is really important, and I'll bet you, on any firing around here, you probably can get 100 of these in. And if you sell them for $2 a piece, shoot, you know. And it's good practice, you know, and they're good for putting glazes on that you normally wouldn't put on something. What happens is when you do a whole bunch of one thing, you become less attached to it. Because you know, if you drop a whole board, no big deal, I can make another board, you know. So that's the other reason for making a lot of one thing, so that you don't feel so emotionally involved with it, so that you can say, okay, I can make more of those, you know. So grab the clay that you need, drop your thumb down there, move the clay to the right with the thumb, raise it up by squeezing the thumb against that finger. Okay, that's no different than grabbing the clay like this. This is the outside finger, this is the inside finger. So you become more fluid at what you're doing and less breaking up. It's like learning dance steps. Pretty soon you put them together and they're very fluid. Or a piece of music, you know, you learn parts of it and then you put it together and it all works out. So same way with clay, you become very, very fluid with your motions, and you begin doing things in such a manner that you're not wasting motion. It just becomes that way. You'll start eliminating things that you used to do because you found that you don't really need to do that anymore to get the same results. And hopefully the results are better as time goes. So even when I go back to the studios in Japan, I spend a lot of time throwing very, very small pieces for long days. And of course we're going the other direction too, so that takes me about a day to get used to. Okay. And how many left-handers here? Left-handed people. Any left-handed people? If you run into left-handed people and they're having trouble with the wheel business, if they throw at 6 o'clock, it doesn't make any difference which way the wheel's going or which hand they're using. So a lot of potters you'll see in Japan that have a hard time with the hand movements. They'll work right here at 6 o'clock, and it doesn't make any difference which fingers you're using where, as opposed to having to move here or 3 o'clock or 9 kind of thing. So it'll help them out. Okay, any questions about these? Remember, thin them down, get a nice curve in there. You know, I see some of you using the knuckle, the three point, that is great. Just be very gentle with it so you don't put much of a twist in it. And this afternoon when we cut these up, it'll make sense about the twisting problem. Remember, cut that up at about a 45-degree angle. So when you put the chamois on, you have kind of a nice edge here that will cut the drip off. And I want to thank Joan here for all her help today.
Yay, Joan. Yes.
Okay, let's talk about lids here. You guys use these sponges?
No.
Yeah, aren't these great? They have a rough surface on one side.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Where do you get those?
You get them at, I've been getting them at Home Depot, and I get them where they, not in the paint section, but where the plaster supplies, you know, for guys that do cement kind of work. And
Tiles?
tile, yeah. They use those for cleaning up the tile. Sorry about that.
Okay.
That's okay. We'll put it down here just so I can keep track of it. Okay, lids. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go over the cap lid and then I'll show you a couple other possibilities. Remember, always grab more clay than you think you need. Put your thumb down there. It's just like the little bud vase, picking the clay up, but you're going to just move it out a little further. And don't be afraid to take those calipers and measure it before you get out too far to see where you're at, okay? So you want this about halfway, half the lump of that clay in the calipers, half out of it. Smooth this up so it has a nice look to it. Don't be afraid to get some slip on there. Also, normally I have a very thick slip bucket that I throw from. You can squeeze that up. Get some slip on there. You're going to push down, make that happen. Come back up here, get that up. Remember, you want this a little narrower than down here. If this is too wide, it's not going to fit in. If this is too narrow, when you tip the pot, the lid's going to fall out. But I'll show you later how to pour tea in such a manner that if you didn't have this, it would still work. Okay? So in case you have a pot you're trying to sell and the lid keeps falling out, I'll show you how to deal with that. Any questions as I go, please ask.
So how important is it that it be a fairly sharp angle at the bottom, the base?
You mean here?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty critical. If that is too rounded, 9 chances out of 10 it's going to be too wide to fit all the way down. And this will be catching somewhere in here by the time the pot dries. You know, the clay shrinks about 10 to 15%, but because the top of your teapot isn't very thick and you have a little more mass here, then generally this will shrink a little bit more sometimes.
Is it thinner? Or is that
Sometimes it doesn't. And what happens is the teapot not only shrinks in but down, and as it goes down it closes. And so generally this is too tight. So you really want to have that measurement really sharp down there. And also, by nature of throwing, it's going to be a little thicker in this wall right here. So you can always trim a little off here, but you really can't do anything on the rim of your pot. It's pretty well static. So you want to be pretty close. You want to be right down there in that corner. Okay. You know, I don't mind a teapot lid that moves a little bit, but it's really nice if they fit, you know, really well. And most of you you should be firing your lid on the pot, so you always have that white area. You shouldn't see that white area when the lid is on. And so you want a little indentation in here, enough trough in here to cover that, but not so much that this edge touches, this edge right here, touches the teapot body, because you're going to glaze that area and it's going to stick, right? Yeah, so really important.
So there's no cupping up of this piece there?
Very minimal. I mean, it's not enough to really cause a problem. It's usually thick enough to where it pretty well stays where you put it. Okay. Okay, I'm going to show you very quickly here what we call a drop, what they call a drop lid.
George, is there going to be a video of this?
So then
I don't need to be doing this.
And on the website.
Okay.
No, but tonight when you get home you can. See, you can look right at it. Okay.
We're actually bringing you home with us.
Oh, really? I don't know if my wife would go along with that.
Go to the YouTube to go off, right there.
So what I'm going to do is just grab a chunk of clay here. I'm not going to measure it, but I'll show you the technique. So instead of pushing down in the center, a lot of us in Santa Cruz, you know, are right of center. We're really not on center. So it makes it really easy to do this. So grab the chunk of clay and push down here. Okay, I want to leave a knob there. Now, I could also do a lid that follows the dome of the pot right at this point. Maybe I'll do that real quick and then go to the drop lid. Okay, so I can kind of finish this up right here. Okay. Okay, now the key is to, if you're doing that kind of lid, is to come up. Because it's going to want to settle if you don't. Okay. So if that was the outside diameter of my teapot gallery, okay, and then I'm going to take this rib here, and what I need to do is make this a little smaller down here. Okay. I'm just going to take this and I know Joan was just thinking, hey, that's a little crooked up there. She didn't say it, but I could hear it way over here. Okay, so that's pretty simple, huh? Yeah. And if you didn't like this kind of a knob here, you can always decide, okay, I don't like that knob there, I'll just open it up. Okay, does that make sense?
Yep. So
So-
how would you treat a pot rim differently?
No, I put I'll show you some galleries in a moment that'll fit. So you want a trough for that to fit in, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the last teapots I threw had a rim on them, right? A raised rim for the cap lid. So this one here, you'd have to have an indentation for it to drop down into, right? Some people want, when you look at that nice round teapot, that the roundness continues right to here, kind of thing. Or if you have undulations on your pot, that this would, what I've just done, would kind of augment that a little bit. So it's just a matter of taste and the kind of teapots you want to make. Okay. 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 We'll put that there. Right, and this, when I trim this, I turn it over in the teapot and use the teapot as my chuck. Okay, so it makes it really simple. So a lot of things that we trim often will use the body as the chuck for the lid. Okay, so again, a little left or right of center here. Okay. You okay over there, Joan? Okay. So you need to narrow this down here so it's smaller than whatever it's going to go into. And you're going to make the squeeze and come up. Right? Now this is going to go down inside the teapot. Okay? So that means that this has to be fairly small. We're going to flange this out to catch the gallery in the teapot, okay? So I'm going to square that up. Now remember, leave this a little chunky because you're going to fold it out, which stretches it, the diameter, so it's going to be smaller. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm putting my fingernail underneath the chamois here, and I'm going to fold this out. My thumb, right thumb, is against the edge of this area here, so it stays strong, compresses it, and leaves a little beef there for me. Okay? Finish that up. You can finish this knob now, or you could have finished it before you turned it over or before you even pulled the clay up. So it just depends on what you want to do.
Is that a pretty heavy lid?
No, it's not that heavy. It's just that the center of gravity is low, so that generally, by the time you leave this much in there, little beef on the bottom, it's not going to tip out generally.
But this is really thick, right?
No,
Or not? Oh,
yeah,
it's
this
not.
piece right in here, but you're going to trim that out later. Okay. And it's up to you how much weight you want to leave in it. Okay. Now watch what happens as soon as I put this line in.
Flattened out.
Changes the whole visual. So what I'm telling you is line is so important, as it is to painters, to us. A line on a pot can change the whole personality of the piece. So really kind of think about lines on pots and where you're going to put them and how they're going to affect the visual. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put a line there, cut this off. And I have one of these I brought with me, so this afternoon you'll see me assemble it and you'll see how this all works. Okay, anything else I should go over that anybody struggling with it? Oh, that's a cute one. Okay, usually that knob I put on afterwards. I don't like to leave a lot of clay that I have to trim off to create the knob.
Hollow.
So, pardon?
It's hollow.
Is it hollow? Well, you can do that. I've tried that, but it's never really worked well for me. Because what happens is it starts putting the center of gravity up high enough to where things want to fall apart. Let me cut this back off. So if I was going to do that, I'd put a knob of clay on it and throw something that was a little more exciting than that knob. Like I say, I don't really care for these kinds of knobs. I'll usually open them up or I'll close them so they're bulbous. They will be hollow, that kind of thing. So it's up to you. Any other questions?
How do you kind of, I guess through experience, but balance the different pieces so that you don't have a great big cap and a little,
Well, you know what? The best thing you can do is do a sketch, a full dimensional drawing. And some students that I have that are struggling with that, I have them actually cut it out of tar paper, roofing paper. So they have a silhouette, a black silhouette that they can hang right in front of them with all the pieces, individual pieces to the size.
Yeah.
And so that's what they throw to. They take those measurements and throw to those measurements. It's the thing that's really important, I think, for if you're trying to make a living at this or you're trying to sell your work, is to do multiples. So it builds up your skill factor. So your learning curve increases. Try to stay with something long enough. So, and the other thing I want to say is that I don't sit down and throw pots unless I know exactly what I'm going to do. In other words, the clay and I have a real symbiotic relationship. I let it know what I want to do, and we work together. So I think it's the worst thing you can do is sit down and just make whatever. I mean, it's fun, and if that's where you're at, that's fine. But if you really want to learn how to make pots, you really need to know what you're going to do. Have the measurements defined, and sit down and do that set. And they stack nice, look nice. They don't have to all be exactly, they can be a little wonky, but they all look like they go together. Usually what I do is if I'm making teapots or whatever I'm making, I usually make a series or stay with the day making that particular item. And with teapots, I always make a bunch of teapots with certain size lids and make extra lids. Same way, at the end of the day, I make a bunch of spouts, so I've got a dozen spouts more than I really need, because sometimes when you start assembly and you cut a spot to fit, you'll find that it really doesn't look good on that particular pot. So if you have an array of spouts to choose from, you won't be apt just to take that one because that's what you've got to put it on. So it's kind of like playing tricks with yourself, right?
Do you do the same thing with lids?
Yeah, same way with lids. Always make a few extra because invariably I'll drop one.
Or when you take it off, it kind of goes off center.
Right, right. Or sometimes if I usually open the doors of my studio on nice days, but if the breeze starts coming in, it's going to dry one side faster than the other, and then by the time I catch it, I've got a warpage problem I've got to deal with, okay? So make yourself some extra spouts. So somebody said, well, I saw that drop lid and saw this lid, but how do you make it fit on the pots that you showed us how to throw this morning? That's a good question. Okay, we're going to do that right now. So I've just thrown one there, and that's going to tie in with this spout that you see there later on today. So you'll see how it all works. Janine and I were talking about coffee pots and coffee pot spouts, and this is a spout I use on coffee pots primarily. So, okay, so remember that same thing about grabbing the clay and figuring out how much you're going to need, right? So you can put a hole in it like that, and then you can come out here and push down. So you have really a big knob if you want it, right? And it's hollow. Somebody was asking about hollow knobs, thank you. So what we can do here, we can get really fancy. See, this is nothing more than a bud vase upside down, right? I'm just throwing it upside down, so this would be the fluted part, right? And you all know how to do that. So just make it look nice. And we're going to pooch this out a little bit. And then we get that. I know some of you are using the 3-point squeeze. That's really a good way to go. You can do a lot of things with the thumb and the first finger, but with this, if you look at it, the knuckle is lower, right? This second finger. So what it does is it kind of sets up everything for the fingers above so that it all kind of works. Okay.
So it's 3 points on each, from each hand.
On each hand, right. So it kind of closes things up.
Just the knuckle, not the whole.
Yeah, my two fingers and the knuckle. The other thing too is that if you want to get more proficient at throwing larger pieces, it also holds true on the left hand. Instead of throwing with the knuckle this way, you put your thumb down here, which forces the knuckle up, and you'll move more clay.
The left hand.
Now, for those of you guys with the right hand that want to use your knuckle, if you put the knuckle out there and this thumb just below that, as you're lifting clay, you'll lift up about twice as much clay as you've been used to doing. And the reason for it is that this thumb starts a ridge ready for this knuckle to pick up. Instead of pushing in with that knuckle and then raising, you'll move a lot more clay. So
Do you brace the thumb against your there, or is it sticking out of the wind?
No, I just get it out of the way, or I put it in here if I'm not going to use my thumb as a precursor here. Okay. Yeah. So by putting the thumb there, see, a lot of people start like this, moving into the clay. You really want to be more of an angle so that when you move in, you're already moving in and lifting the clay. But with this knuckle here and the thumb out here, you'll get a lot more clay moving. It feels a little awkward, but after, you know, a few mugs, a few cups, you'll have it. Okay.
Like this.
Like that.
Okay.
I think that's
You're
what
kind
it
of
that what
lean
you're
down
doing?
to get under it, right? And then you can
Right.
thumb is up
Yeah.
above
dig
it?
it up.
Right.
But then the thumb is up above.
Right.
Is this for throwing? I mean,
Yeah, for throwing, moving a lot of clay. Right. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is make that drop lid, and then I'm going to fold it out here. Now, since this is so big, you have to get it up higher, right, so you can get a hold of it. So it'll be for a different kind of pot. I probably wouldn't do this for a teapot. So we'll make something different here. But I just want you to see what happens when you start putting mass to a lid, okay?
Why didn't you keep this pot, the top?
Why I didn't keep this lid?
Yeah.
Well, I just was showing you something. Normally, I don't keep much of any of my demo stuff. It'll be left behind. And
So, but you didn't like this to use it.
yeah, you can use that, but it's going to work the same way this does.
Okay.
In other words, you have to set the gallery up for either that one or this one the same way. And so I use this corner here to kind of straighten things out a bit. And like I say, if you work in front of a mirror, you can really see what you're doing a lot better and save your back. And maybe I'll put a little dip in that so the glaze will collect in there. So
So do you need the folded over part at pretty much a 90 degree?
not quite. If you look, it's gonna, I know it's gonna raise up a little bit. So if you look at it, it's really not quite flat. And I like that. And if there's any burrs left, I don't deal with them right now. I'll wait until I trim, and then I'll knock those off. Or I'll wait till they're bone dry, and I'll take a little scrubby and knock those off, because trying to get them off now, you're gonna cause some problems. So.
Is that a clothespin?
Yeah, they still use these in Canada. I don't know if you can even buy them in this country anymore.
You can make
Yeah.
it maybe.
So it's always there where I need it.
They
Sell
do?
at Michael's, yeah,
Mike-
for golf.
Right.
Ah.
So I just drilled a little hole in it and put this twine through it. Okay, we'll put that there. Okay, thank you.
We might want to move that out
Well,
a little
you know-
bit because it's not centered underneath that.
Thank you.
But it's catching under here. It's up to the wall.
Oh, it's underneath.
The bag is slightly underneath. That's what you're saying.
Just worried about it.
Yeah.
And I'm doing a week-long teapot workshop and related items to the teapot, the 17th. It's a 1 week, 5-day
17th of what?
of June. So Monday through Friday, and it's about 9 till about 5 or 6.
Santa Cruz?
In Santa, I'm doing it at Santa Cruz High School. The junior college just wants to charge too much. They want about $400 for a week, you know, for the students. And I can do it at the high school for about $260.
Is it because you work at the high school?
Maybe. I'll get him his
Well,
mail.
that, and I don't take as much salary, you know. I found that there's a lot of great potters and a lot of great teachers out there. I used to teach at Mendocino, and it was a lot of fun in the early days because it was cheap. And I got a lot of potters coming. And then after 3 years, they started raising the money to a point where I was getting people who were interested in clay, but they weren't as serious as the groups I was getting before that, because they were mostly potters, you know, guys trying to make a living at it or moving into a living. And so I told them unless they brought their prices down to where they were, and I'd take less money, or I was going to quit, so I quit. And so that's why I've never taught for a junior college, is because if you look at the workshops available, $400 to $500 for a week, then you got to find a place to stay and you got to eat. I mean, you're looking at $1,000, you know. And most of the guys I know that are struggling in pottery really can't afford that. So I try to keep it down around $250, $260, and make it so I get a group of people that I don't think I would get if I was charging $500 for a week. I kick the door open about 8 o'clock, so those want to come in early and get a few things, you know, finished from the day before, and then we start at 9, and usually by 6, 7, we're done for the day.
How many are usually in the class?
I only take 10.
So if we get on your mailing list, can we
You know, if you just dial up Santa Cruz Adult Education, it should come up.
So are you doing other workshops this summer?
Beside that
Yeah, I'll do that one. That'll be the 17th. Then the following week, I'm doing a workshop for beginners and intermediate on large vessels, how to throw large pieces. And Joan can tell you a lot about that. She's getting good. She failed the first one. She had to come back. No, she didn't fail, but she was kind enough to come back and help me.
I can share 30 teapots.
Do how many?
30. But you know, he's joking, but I'm really serious. I really, you know. Before I make 30 teapot, I never did. And then the next, and then I did register another section about teapot for 5 more days. At that time, I have more finished piece. I feel better. I really understand better. I think, you know, if you guys have the experience today, if you can register for the teapot for the 5 days, that will be like a step-by-step.
Yeah.
Not like me, I jumped in with a big wish I could bid, but you know, but I did not do it. And then after that, I did another workshop with George. Is I'm bravier. I want to learn how to throw big, and so I did that. And George also made his own tool. This is most of the metal rig is soft metal.
I was noticing how hard his is.
And this is a stiff metal rig. It's really stiff. This is very good when you want to really push up. Okay. He have 2 shapes. One is a square and a circle. One is more like kidney shape. Both of them I have it. I use it a lot. If you guys want to do a little bit bigger, have a size volume there, and then this is a wonderful tool. Each one of the tool is $10.
How are you using it?
Push it out. You know, when
Oh, from the inside.
from the inside
Okay.
out, you should
Yeah.
push it out. If you want to throw bigger, and also this is very good if you want to do something do the outside. Like George said.
Yeah,
You can
he's
put
using
it
it
on.
for.
You can do whatever you want, but I think this is a very useful tool for me. If you guys have interested to learn more for the George 5-day workshop for Santa Cruz, I can set up a sign-in list that you guys can write down your name, phone number, email address. George will contact with you. George also have name tag, name card over there. Welcome to take one. Email him. He will return your email. He will. And phone call too. He is very good about returning phone call. And I'm volunteer to help George today because you know when he doing the workshop, he try to help everybody, and then. You will have a lot of things, you know, going. So that's the reason I volunteered to help.
Okay, you can see how this gallery is a little different than what you've been doing. It's a little more complicated. So I showed you the other technique because it's a lid that you'll use on a lot of different things as a cap lid, you know, for storage jars, those kinds of things. With this one here, you have to have it deep enough so that when you drop this in, it's going to sit down. Now there's a teapot there with a side handle. It has an infuser in it. So the infuser also takes space, so you have to have this gallery deep enough so that when you drop the infuser in, the thickness of that infuser, the thickness of the rim, is still down below this. It looks kind of funny if the edge of the lip where the lid is a little higher than the rim. It just doesn't look quite right. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So that'll fit down there. You can make them hollow if you want. Now generally, hopefully this will be dry enough, we can trim it this afternoon. And I'll usually put a hole all the way through the center here. Because if you don't put holes in the lids, when you pour, it's going to kind of go glug, glug, glug. Because the water moisture sits in this gallery and then it kind of makes a seal for the lid. And so it doesn't want to pour well. So you need at least a hole somewhere. up there.
Like a tin can. I don't want to do it inside.
Yes. If you put a T-ball inside and hang it out here so the lid is kind of cocked a little bit, it'll work great. Yeah.
So a question for you, if you were using this lid,
Uh-huh.
you trim off the stuff underneath, or would it have
Yeah.
a flange underneath this?
No, I turn it over and I trim all of this off, and this edge would drop right in there.
So how does that stay on when you're pouring?
That's problematic. Yeah. So you have to, like a lot of the English do, they use two hands when they're
Okay, so you hold
pouring.
it.
Yeah. So you have to hold it. So this here, you'd have better luck with something like this, because it has a low center of gravity. So I have a little collaboration going here with Janine. She's kind enough to let me foist this upon her. So what I've had her do is put a hole where this spout's going to go, and it's going to be this spout. So if you want to hand me that pot, please. Thank you. Okay, now what makes this work primarily is that there's a very nice undercut here. There's actually a flange of clay that sticks out about that much beyond the inside surface. So it will help catch the liquid and pour it out. So she's put a hole just below that flange, and I'm going to put a couple more in. Oh, thank you. And I've also put one on the lid here, so that you know, air will get into the lid, and the lid's going to fit like that. And while you guys were busy over there, I trimmed it by inverting it on here for my chuck. Okay, so I'm going to put this over here so I don't drop it. I'm going to put a couple more holes. So anybody have one of those big trimming tools with a loop on the end? You know, that kind of like this square and it went in and a round loop.
A bigger one.
Yeah, if you have one, could I borrow that for a moment? I want to show you a little bit more about hydraulics here so things pour better for you. So what I'm going to do is bevel these holes so that when the liquid comes through, so what happens, you have a force of liquid in the inside, and so to speed it up coming out, I want to bevel these edges. It's a little thing, but it makes it beautiful. It makes a big difference on how things pour. So, like I say, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but it does. No, just on the outside, because the water's escaping. This is where it wants to let loose. So, and on the inside, there's little burrs. So when it gets bone dry, I take a little scrubby and knock those off. Okay.
Is there a shape that you chose? It looks like a triangle shape. Is that normal?
That's pretty common, yeah.
Okay.
In Buddhism, we talk about 3, 5, and 7, right? So there's 5 holes there. You know, it's kind of that struggle against evenness, you know. It's kind of like when I built my studio. If you look around here, everything is horizontal and vertical, pretty much, except the pipe. So when I had the windows put in, we took a slab of wood and put it across those windows and dropped it so you could see the natural curvature of the tree instead of that straight line. And so part of what I struggle with is everything is so uniform and even in my life surroundings. So I have a lot of glass so I can look out at the trees. I have some oak trees out there and different plants. So it keeps reminding me that things are not uniform. You know, not every tree has the same shape, the bark is different, not every leaf is the same. Even ginkgo leaves, which look the same, if you start really looking at them, they're all different. And so it's that struggle of staying away from uniformity that we're kind of all brought up, you know, the sets of this and sets of that, and, you know, that kind of stuff. So it's a constant bane of my existence sometimes. That's why I think my comfort zone in Japan is so great and has always been that way, is that I can really fall into that. So what I'm going to do is cut this. What's nice, you have 2 of them here. So if you screw up on one, the other one's gonna, you have another chance, right? Second chance. If I could do 3, I'd be doing it, you know, but, okay, so I'm gonna cut that down toward, and it's important that that is against the heel of my hand because I don't want to fray that edge. I want it to be pretty clean cut, so it's going to go right against the meaty part of my hand. And I try to keep this fairly sharp. But you notice I'm going this way, I'm not sawing, right? You saw and you hit the flesh, it's going to hurt. Okay. And then I'm going to take and cut out this extra. And if it was really thick, I would use this tool here, which some friends of mine in Japan make. It's cut on both sides, but one side is horizontal and the other one has about a 30-degree cant to it. And so a lot of times that works a little easier, getting a nicer cut. And these are tempered steel, carbon, so, okay. But since this is the most common tool in the studio, demonstrations, I'll probably stay with that. So I need to decide, if I look at that, that's not going to work, is it? Okay. So I need to cant it this way a little bit more. So to do that, I'm going to put that against my hand. And which way should I cut this? You think this way? Okay, we'll try that way. Ah, that looks a little better, huh? So maybe just a little bit more. So this is kind of the goofy stuff we do in our shop. We're always trying stuff, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, that should pour pretty well. And I'm covering all my holes. Now this is stiffened up a little bit, so what I'm going to do is take it and put that in a little water. And then if I take and push it against there gently, it'll give me somewhat of an outline. Or if I'm worried that the outline might not be very clear, I can kind of play with this a little bit. Okay. What's nice is that little curve back into the pot. See up on top? I like that. So little water and let it sit there for a few moments and it should soften right up. In the meantime, I'm going to move this over just a little bit, score this up. And thanks to Joan, she made some slip for me, which was really nice of her. So, thank you, Joan. Okay. Any questions while I'm doing this, just throw them out. Otherwise, I'll just keep doing this for an hour. So I'm going to put that right there. And I'm going to scruff this up a little bit. Kind of smooth that a little. See how that softened up real quick? Now when I'm assembling pieces, big, small, multiples, whatever, I let them dry for a long time. I have a damp box that I'll put this in and forget about it for a week. It's because you spend a lot of time putting things together and then you rush things. And since we put a little heat on these, kind of force them a little, when you get home tonight, wrap them up in plastic for a few days and let things even out. And you should have total success.
How big is your damp box?
It's pretty good size. Thanks to my wife, we were in Phoenix at the NCCA conference a few years back, and we stopped by the guys that make slab rollers and all kinds of stuff, North Star. And they had one of these damp boxes there, and she said, you know, why don't you quit messing around and spend the money and get a damp box? And I said, geez, that's a lot of money. I could probably build one. Yeah, you've been saying that for 5 or 6 years that you're going to build one. And so I talked to the guy for a little bit, and I said, you know, if you knock a few $100 off of that, I'd take it right now. And he said, okay, so fast. It made me nervous. Geez, if I would have said 300 or 400. So he knocked 2.5 off of it, and there was no tax in Phoenix, right? And so I bundled that sucker up, and I knew that at some point my nephew over there in Phoenix would be coming to California, you know, to visit. So he hauled it back for me, and it's been one of my better investments, you know. Probably the best investment I ever made was in equipment, was buying a used Peter Pugger. I'll tell you, that machine is something else. It was about 5 years old when I got it. Person decided to quit playing in clay, and I'd been recycling my clay by hand for 35 years or so in buckets. And then when it started pulling away from the bucket, I'd put it in a piece of canvas, hang it out on a tree. When it quit dripping, I'd squeeze it, and it was about right. I'd take it, roll it out, bag it up, let it set for 6-7 months, and use it. You know, so it was really nice.
With the pugger, you just get to throw it in there and it's ready to go?
Pardon?
With the pugger, you just throw everything in there, it's ready to go?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, you need to throw wet stuff in, and then you need to really break up the dry stuff. You know, you need to take a mallet and break it up, so it really does a nice job. You're not stressing the machine. But yeah, it's really nice. And the other thing nice about it is that I usually work with Bravo Buff and Danish White, and they are an amazing clay body when you mix them. And also, what I've just done on a lark is I also use Black Mountain. I love Black Mountain clay for a lot of different reasons, but I threw some of those trimmings in right at the end of the mix, and it was like that bread you buy, you know, with the dark, you know, rye bread with the dark and light, and it fired out really neat without having to put any glaze on the outside. I don't do much glazing in Japan. I like the natural clay to show, and it's highly appreciated there. So I've done some, you'll see a teapot there with no glaze on the outside of the Black Mountain. I just really like showing that off. I really like terracotta clays and red clays, but it just messes up my shop, you know, trying to keep it clean. So I'm going to stop with that right there, and I'm going to give this back to Janine, and she can kind of really spend some time putting little pieces of clay in there and filling in little spots, and then we'll wrap it up tight. There's enough slip oozing out there where you can, so I like to spend a lot of time on pieces. I don't like to rush. Like I said, I don't usually use heat either, but since we're on a time constraint here, so I'm going to leave this with you. And if you just kind of fill it in down there and just kind of work it in, so the closer you get to that milk carton spout, the less drip you're going to get. But it's hard to make that look good on a pot. Yeah. Unless, if you're hand building, you can get away with it, right? You can make a geometric pot and really make that work, and it all fits together. But when you're dealing with round things and putting something geometric to it, it's really tough. It can be done, and I've seen it done, and it's worked out, but it's something you have to really spend a lot of time with. And since most everything people ask me for is done on the wheel, I've been brought into the digital age kicking and screaming, and one of my students took it upon themselves to make a web page for me.
Make a web page?
Yes, I have a web page. Just happened a couple days ago. So if you want to look at it, you're welcome to do so. Just Google up George the Potter, and you'll see what's happening in my life because my students keep putting stuff on there. So you have your pot sitting in front of you. Be sure the lid's on it, and pick out one of the spouts that you think might work good on whatever you're doing. And you're going to cut this. You're going to hold it so it's away from you, and you're going to cut so you come out here somewhere, okay? So if you look at this, this is the bottom of your spout. So you're going to cut somewhere up here through that at an angle that'll bring the bottom of the spout level with the top of your rim. Okay, does that make sense?
Like in the picture? Like in the picture.
Yeah. So don't do it from the top. You want the bottom edge. Okay? So depending on where you want it here is going to determine how the angle of cut's going to be. The lower it is, the steeper you're going to have to make it, right? If you look at the form, the water is going to roll, or the liquid is going to roll here, right? So if you're too far here, it could have a problem in pouring. If you have it too high, then you may have to tip further and it's going to come out the lid. So it's a matter of just doing a lot of these and deciding how you're going to make them. Now, also, with the lid on there and the spout on there, you need a certain amount of space here for the lug, if you're going to put lugs. If you're going to put a handle on it, you need to remember that the bigger the teapot is, and you're going to put a handle on it, it's going to probably be a two-handed teapot. And if you watch English, if you're in England and a lot of places in Europe, they always pour their tea with two hands. Usually a little rag right here, and they grab it here, and they pour your tea. A little rag catches, a little tea towel catches any runoff. So I find that, for me, awkward. But it's something you may want to do, and you just pull the handle on it just like you would on your mug, right? Except you have a little curve, so it means you're going to have to come out further to make it work. Any questions about side handles? Also, normally the side handles you see on that little short teapot, if you take a look, pull the lid off of it, no, the one with the handle off the side. Yeah, that one. There's an infuser in there. So take the lid off there so they can see that, if you would. Yeah, it has a drop lid and a ceramic infuser. Okay? So that's another reason for making a lid that would fit in a gallery as opposed to this. If you're going to have an infuser, somebody said they were buying them out of, who was it? Yeah, you can go to probably Japantown here or any Asian food outlet, and you're going to find these stainless steel pieces. And they're a nice way to go too. So, but you still have to do that flange and make it deep enough so that that'll fit in and there's room for the lid to set in. Okay. Okay, so the reason for making a lot of different spouts is so you have a lot of options. So if you make a mistake in the cut, you have another opportunity. Okay. Remember, you can always do a second cut if you didn't cut an angle tough enough to make it all work. Okay, so how close am I? This is what's nice about working in front of that mirror. You can see it all happen. So that's pretty close, right? Now, also that steep angle, it'll pour a little nicer too, as opposed to being way out here somewhere, up here, okay? And there's nothing wrong with, when this is a little damper than it is now, to take and kind of coax it into a little curve. It kind of gives it a nicer look, and you might be a little happier with the visual. Okay, again, I'm going to cut.
So do you curve it up or down?
Generally, you'd curve it. It wouldn't make any difference which way you, but it would make a difference when you make the cut, right? You're going to do that while it's still in this stage. You're going to coax it out, just a little bit of a curve to it.
But when you attach it to, does it curve?
The curve would be going away from you, as if it were attached to the pot.
Down
right.
towards the earth as opposed up to the sky.
Correct, correct. And so I like to get a lot of this out of here. It'll take some of the weight out of the pot. You have to be careful with these. These things are really sharp. So. So I want to get this down to where the thickness is pretty much what you see here. Get some of that weight out, but leave me a little flange there so I can attach it. Okay. So again, I can wet this. And put it there for a few minutes. Okay, so I'll put my chopstick back here. So right about there. Okay. Now I'll have to turn it around here and make sure I'm kind of square with the world. Oh, that's not too bad.
George, the picture shows that it's horizontal with the chopstick.
The what?
That picture shows that the spout is lower.
Right. It's going to be lower
do
once I
whatever
make
you
the
want,
cut.
right?
Yeah. I want a full measure of liquid. So I found that if I use the bottom, by the time I cut it and play with that spout, it's going to be lower.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's going to be lower. Not as low as those guys. But so I'm going to make some holes here. Okay, you notice, I don't know if you can see that little ring around there, left from the spout. So you want to take that spout when it softens up and lay it against there, and that way you can tell exactly what you need to do here. Now I've put a little line right here, so that's going to kind of guide me for the first couple spots here. That's the bottom holes to start letting the liquid through first. Okay, so they're pretty important, more so than the upper holes.
How many holes do you put in?
I'm going to put 9. Yeah, I lost count. 3, 6, 7, 8. Okay, right here. Okay. Then again, using that, what did I do? Misplace that trimming tool. Oh, there it is. Like I say, be sure when you're glazing that you put your mouth around that spout and blow in real hard. Kick that glaze out of there. It's really sad when you make a nice teapot and it's full of glaze in those holes.
If you want to see the example of that, that one over there dribbles just a little out, and I didn't know.
Doesn't pour, it only leaks.
Yeah, it's really sad. I'll never do that.
Had an instructor
It
that,
takes once.
once it was bisqued, he would put his hand over the end of the spout and put water into the spout. And
Yeah.
count to 3 and then let go. And then because the clay was wet,
Mm-hmm.
then when you glazed it, it didn't adhere as well.
Yeah, that's another way to do it.
So that works.
Usually what I do is I let the glaze all come out of the spout. Once it's glazed, I have my finger over the end of the spout and slosh it around and then pour it out through the spout. And that usually thins it out as it's coming out. And then just blow really hard back through it. And if you use iron oxide, you have red lips, and it's kind of neat. Yeah. Okay, and I like to slip fairly thick so that I'm not adding a lot of moisture to this edge because it's already fairly soft just from the dipping in the water.
Is there an advantage to using slip versus, say, vinegar water or something like this?
You know, I've met Lana Wilson a few times, and she swears by it. I know a lot of my students use it, but I usually don't. I just a little water. And I do use vinegar in my clay buckets, though. Otherwise, they start smelling pretty bad after a while. Okay. So again, normally I'll attach that. Make sure it's kind of square with the world somewhat. And again, I'm looking in my mirror as I'm working so I can kind of see what's happening. Okay, got some flexibility there. Drop that down a little bit. And then I've got this little spot here, which is no big deal. The devil's in the details, so you'll spend a lot of time getting things really finished. And after they're bone dry, I do go back and spend a lot of time doing cleanup kind of stuff on teapots. A little green scrubby, taking off burrs and nicks, and porcelain is even worse. So.
Are you filling a gap, or are you just kind of easing an angle there?
I'm sorry?
Are you filling a gap, or just easing?
Yeah, I'm filling a little gap there.
Oh, okay.
That gap allows me to, because it's soft in here, it allows me to adjust that just like about 1/8 of an inch either way, so that when I attach it and I put that chopstick on, if it's up too high or it's up too low, I can adjust that right at this point and take care of that little gap there. And I do this with dry fingers. I don't add any water to this because you don't want to get things really soft. And also, if you're trying to move a little clay, it's not going to move if your hands are wet. Okay? And if need be, I'll add little pieces of clay here and there. Okay? And I'll come back here in a few minutes and take care of that. I'm going to take and put this on there, and then I'm going to smooth this out. I'm going to talk about lugs in a moment here. The key is to throw the spout or the bud vase in the same number of throws each time, so that it will twist about the same every time. And wedging, I should talk a little bit about wedging. You should wedge your clay up to the same consistency each time for teapots. It's going to be different from large vessels. It's going to be different for cups. In Japan, I did a lot of wedging, not so much anymore, for throwers. So my job was to throw clay consistent for what they were making those days, each potter. And so for teapots, I like the clay a little stiffer so I can really push them out. And so it's important that you do that each time so that the clay is very consistent and that your throwing is consistent and the twisting will be very consistent. So you have to be really aware of what's happening. So I know from experience that if I cut just above that point and at about that angle, to my thumb, they will come out pretty straight, okay? I'm going to dampen this up a little bit here. So what I'm doing is elongating the spout and making it a little bit narrow and bringing that curve out a little bit more. I want to get away from the sharp spots that I have here because glaze doesn't want to stick to them, right? So, can you guys see that? So, see how I've changed that? I've brought that out a little further. So with the lid on it and a handle on it, it's all going to come together. So just do a lot of spouts and cut them and let them dry and see how much they move. The biggest movement is going to be during the drying and then the bisque fire, right? So, you know, cut them off, put them in the kiln like that, fire them and see how much they're moving on you. And that should give you a pretty good idea, if you do 3 or 4 of those, stick them in the kiln, about where you need to cut to make it level out. And even then, sometimes you'll mess up and there'll still be a little bit of it off, but they'll still pour fine. Okay. About the size of your little finger generally is a good place to start. Some of you have daintier flower pots. You have daintier teapots, so you may want to make them not quite that big around. And you should have the lid on your teapot close to you, so that we can kind of see how things go. Okay, as you know from coil building, the weakest part of the coil is where? Let me rephrase that.
There's an assumption in that.
That's what I like, good humor. Okay, it's the ends. So, those of you that have trouble rolling out clay flat, you know, what you can do, you know, if it's not coming out round, what you can do is you can take a piece of clay like this here and just kind of make it round. And then if you just hold it up about eye level and go like this, you'll have a nice coil.
Look at that.
My grandson thinks this is really funny.
It's magic.
He's only 5 though.
We're not years old.
Okay, so that's the other way to make coils. Okay. So you want to cut off about a ½ inch off each end. Okay. Now these don't have to be round. I've got some teapots on display on the other side. You might look at those. Sometimes I put creases in them. I try to do them a little different depending on the mood. But you want them beefy enough so that they're going to do their job. So if you all take a coil of clay and hold it like this. Come on, Sandra, humor me.
Pay attention, this is so important.
Okay, so
Don't blink.
you want to hold it so that your thumbnails are facing you. You want it about eye level, and you're going to go like this. Makes a nice little loop, right? And then you can flatten one end, flatten the other end, lick it, and stick it, and see where you're at. Does it look too big for your teapot? Does it stick out too far? If so, then take it off. Take the other coil you had, make it smaller if it looked too big. Okay? Do the same thing. Maybe the other one was too long, so maybe I'll take a little off each end here. Remember, we always take clay off. Same thing. Okay. If it cracks like that, it means the clay is a little bit too dry, so you don't want to use it. So that looks about right size. I want it to be in such a space so that I can get the handle to work through there. Now the cane handles are nice because you can soak them. You can almost tie them in a knot. So no matter how close things are here, you can still make it work. The problem is the lid. You don't want to be so close to the lid that when you pick it up, it catches on the edge of the cane. So I'd err closer to the spout. Okay, so you get that one in, you do another one, lick it and stick it back here, kind of see how they're lined up. Sometimes I put this line on the pot just to kind of give me a guide, so I know where the relationship front and back I am to the way the handles are going to line up. So does that make sense? Yeah, so it kind of gives you a guide is all. Okay, and again, if the handle is starting to crack, get rid of it, get some fresh clay out of your bag, roll them out. Now there's nothing wrong with you know, squeezing those guys out a little bit on the ends, you know, and some people like to kind of get, you know, fancy, yeah, they want to put the fleur de lis on there or something, okay? So, you know, you can do something like that. Doesn't, you know, whatever appeals to you. You know, play around with it, come up with something. Some people use stamps on them, you know, they'll put them on there, and then once they're on there, they'll stick something on like that, you know, or those pods off eucalyptus trees, you know, whatever you want to do to make it more personal. So it's up to you. It's also nice to have the cane handles available so you know about what size you're working with. But even if you make them a little bit too big around the cane handle, when they're wet, they'll wrap around, stick them on, and they're going to shrink and fit. Instead of grabbing it like this and pouring, which takes more wrist action, if you grab it like this and pour, it pours very nicely with minimal effort, and you have your little finger on the lid. That was worth the whole course. Okay, so you know now how to, everybody knows it's going to be on the final. Okay, so, yes, yes. Little teapots they don't, because they're like, we use a lot of small teapots because of the ritual involved with tea and teaism. Even when you go to somebody's house and they're making tea for you, even though it's not a tea ceremony, the teapots are usually very small and very personal. So like if I have 2 guests coming, I'll have a teapot that'll serve the 3 of us for at least 2 or 3 pours. So it'll be big enough so I can pour everybody a cup of tea. And then I will pour more water in for a second tasting of that tea, and maybe even a 3rd tasting. So you're making a tea for that special occasion. It's what the Japanese often call ichigo ichie. It's one moment in time that'll never happen again. Oh, okay. Joan asked me to pass this on to you. Here's another tool we use. During the teapot workshop, we make a lot of attachments to the pot, to the teapot, the cups, the tea caddies, the straining holders, the different things that go along with teapots. And this is a device called a tombo. Tombo in Japanese is dragonfly. And we use these as a measuring device when you're throwing off the hump. What it does is it gives you the width, interior width of what you're throwing, and the depth. So when my students start out, everything is vertical. You don't have to worry about shape. And therefore, the volume of everything should be the same. Does that make sense? So this measures the depth of the inside of your pot and the width.
You don't need a caliper.
You don't need a caliper. And also, we usually sharpen the backside, so if it's a little tall, you can turn it over and cut off the excess. Okay? Very simple.
Very graceful.
We usually make it out of bamboo, but since chopsticks are easy to get and skewering sticks, I usually have them make these like this. So if you come to my studio, you see a lot of them handmade, and I make one for every form that I throw.
Is the different spout for tea versus coffee?
Yes.
Is that what I just heard?
Yes. Did you see that?
Interesting concept.
My grandson thinks this is really funny.
It's magic.
He's only 5 though.